Dozens of religious groups suing the Trump administration to protect houses of worship from immigration arrests. Western Mass News reporter Reagan Lockery joining us live in studio after she spoke with a local church that's taking part in the lawsuit. Reagan.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. 27 groups in total have decided today to sue the Trump administration to protect houses of worship from immigration arrests. And the Unitarian Society of Northampton in Florence tells us their denomination is part of that suit.
I wish that people didn't have to be worried about going to safe places like religious communities and other safe places.
More than 24 Christian and Jewish groups representing millions of Americans, ranging from the Episcopal Church and the Union for Reform Judaism to the Mennonites and Unitarian Universalists, filed a federal court lawsuit Tuesday challenging a Trump administration move, giving immigration agents more leeway to make arrests at houses of worship. In the wake of this lawsuit, Western Mass News spoke with Eric Cherry, the interim minister at the Unitarian Society of Northampton in Florence. He tells us their denomination is part of this court battle.
We want to make sure that we're able to be caring and assistive to our neighbors, our people, regardless of their status in terms of citizenship, without the interference of the federal government.
Cherry explains that although churches have historically been known as places of sanctuary, this lawsuit is more based on making sure everyone feels safe going to their place of worship, rather than housing them in the church.
So that might include hosting people who are hungry. That might include welcoming people into worship services. That might include helping people to find clothing when they're cold. None of those examples are what would traditionally be thought of as sanctuary, but they're all basic parts of what religious communities.
But Cherry adds that they wish to continue providing these basic ministries to their neighbors without first asking for their papers. And in spite of the fear around these new government policies, Cherry tells us people are coming out in droves to gather for religious community.
Our numbers are through the roof right now because of a very strong commitment to living out our religious values in this new moment.
Now, there's no timeline on when this lawsuit will be resolved. However, Cherry tells me he hopes they come to a resolution quickly. Reporting live in studio, Reagan Lockery for Western Mass News.